3, go, go.
What's up, what's up? What's up, what's up? What's up in Marin? What's up around the world? What's up lifestyle show for boys and girls? Life in high school, learning and growing up. Everybody get ready, find out what's up, what's up? What's up, what's up?
And this evening, we are very fortunate to have Holly Pedersen from the Parents' Place. Holly is an expert in the area of child abuse, trauma, domestic violence, violence prevention, conflict resolution, and bullying prevention, and has developed programs to address the issue of bullying, particularly working in inner city schools in Southern California. And we're fortunate that Holly has come up to Northern California, where she is happy to be here for the last year and a half or so, right? So we're very lucky to have her here today.
Thank you. I am really happy to see so many of you here today. So relational bullying, or you'll probably hear me refer to it throughout this presentation as relational aggression. And it's a type of bullying that we see happening as more and more as kids get older, as we'll be talking about. So it's different than the physical bullying, the kind of what you think about when you think about a bully. And what I'm going to do today is really give you a strong understanding of what relational aggression or relational bullying is. We'll start with that, because without knowing what it is, we don't know how to stop it or prevent it. And then at the end, we'll talk about some specific strategies that you can use if your child is being impacted by relational aggression or even is using relational aggression. It's not uncommon for kids to be in both, have both experiences. So as I said, we're going to start with just, I think, providing a really clear understanding of what relational aggression is and why it happens, because without knowing why it happens, it's hard to know what to do about it. And then prevention and intervention strategies for parents. So what is relational aggression or relational bullying? It's behaviors that intentionally are meant to harm others by damaging, threatening to damage, or manipulating one's relationships with his or her peers, or by injuring one's feelings of acceptance and belonging. So you notice that I have intentionally really highlighted there. It is intentional. So just the maybe not liking someone as much, so not paying them as much attention, not necessarily bullying or relational aggression. It's relational aggression and bullying, they're intentionally harmful. It's evident in all age groups. I have parents of children in preschool calling me and telling me my daughter is being excluded from her group of friends. They're telling her that she can't play with them. It happens with both girls and boys. So I think anecdotally, we often think, oh, it's girls, the mean girls phenomenon. And there have been studies that have surveyed both girls and boys, and they've found that both girls and boys report relational aggression. The difference is that it has a more intense emotional impact on girls, because girls in general are, they ruminate more, so they go over and over and over the same kind of thoughts and feelings in their head, and are in general just more emotionally reactive than boys. It really peaks in middle school, so at age 11, it skyrockets. So we see the most relational aggression happening in middle school. And it's a time when kids are starting to, their understanding of social relationships and the importance of social relationships is increasing. And so they're shifting from the old-fashioned, more physical type of bullying or the name-calling to a more sophisticated type of bullying, using relationships, excluding, starts to happen as kids become more socially sophisticated. Unlike more other forms of bullying, physical bullying, it happens more likely within a social circle. So whereas you see bullying, physical bullying happening where the target is isolated outside of a peer group, relational aggression typically happens within a social circle. It may not be within the inner social circle, it may be kind of on one of the outer rings, but it's more likely to happen among friends. And it really happens on a continuum. And so the most kind of minor forms of relational aggression being those nonverbal, the body language you see mostly in girls. You saw a little bit of that in the video, the eye rolling or the turning your back, or that kind of body language. Exclusion is one of the most common forms of relational aggression. A little more severe, the gossiping and rumor spreading, the teasing, and then it can go as far as threats to do harm and actual physical harm. So we need to ask ourselves, at what point on this continuum do we intervene? And it's much easier to intervene when the behaviors are less severe. What does it look like? As I mentioned, exclusion is actually the most common form of relational aggression. So if you survey kids, both elementary school as well as middle school and high school kids, they'll say that the most common way that they feel hurt by others' behavior is exclusion. And that's even worse for girls because girls are much more relational than boys. So being excluded is one of the most painful things that can happen with a girl. Girls will say that it's more painful than being physically abused. Alliance building. Has anyone seen that with their children or their children's circles? Yeah. So it's
the parents.
The parents. Yeah. Yeah.
They start it when the kids do it.
Oh, so they're getting it from their parents. Yeah. And this often does start at home, and we'll talk about some family dynamics that are correlated with the use of relational aggression, and some ways that that parents can really strengthen their children so that they're not using or being impacted by relational aggression. So alliance building, girls do this a lot. They feel uncomfortable fighting their own battles. So what they'll do is when they're in a conflict with another girl, they'll bring in their posse, they'll bring in a whole group of girls, and they'll gang up against the other one because it's hard for them to have that direct conflict. The sabotaging of relationships, we're seeing this happening using social media and digital technology. So spreading rumors online, Facebook posts, trying to isolate the target from other relationships. And then the gossiping and rumor spreading is another form of relational aggression. And these forms, a little more sophisticated, you see more in middle school and older. So it's not that necessarily that some of these you're seeing as early as elementary school. Elementary school, it's more the exclusion and the name calling. Now, why does it happen? This, again, I think it's really important that we know why, so that we know what we can do to intervene effectively. So first of all, what's happening with kids, so starting in elementary school, and then it really starts, it peaks in early adolescence, is there's a neurological growth spurt happening. So the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is not fully developed until we're about 25. And that part of the brain is really undergoing a lot of change. And what it means is for kids, particularly early adolescents and teenagers, is that part of their brain is literally not functioning. And the prefrontal cortex is like the CEO of our brain. So it's the part that exercises judgment, that knows consequences, that knows how to behave, basically. So it's the rational part of the brain. Instead, the part of the brain that's most active in early adolescence and adolescence is the amygdala. And the amygdala is that fight or flight or flight part of the brain. It's actually part of the limbic system, which is a very primitive part of the brain. So I have a picture of a cat here because I always like to think that my cats are really smart, and that anyone who's a dog person, like, no, cats are smarter than dogs. Cats actually have a really small prefrontal cortex, and they're mostly amygdala. So you think about a cat's behavior, I mean, they're just reacting, and that's what the amygdala does. The amygdala is the emotional reaction. It's react before thinking, and it's the part of the brain that controls, it's the seat of anger. So it's the part of the brain that really controls anger and fear. So that's the part of the brain that adolescents are using mostly when making decisions or when responding to their environment. So one study, for instance, looked at brain scans of adolescents and adults, so adults over 25, and looked at what their brains look like when they were making a decision that involved some emotions. And for adults, the part of the brain that was lit up was the prefrontal cortex, that executive functioning. The part of the brain that was lit up for adolescents was their amygdala. So if you think about what this means then for how kids are reacting, they're reacting without a CEO, without someone really being in charge. I don't know how many of you have noticed that teenagers often read anger into things, into interactions that are not really angry. They'll say, "Why are you mad at me? Why are you yelling at me?" And you're not yelling. It's because that amygdala is really on fire. So what that means is that they're reacting in a way that's distorted. So they're seeing their peer interactions and their relationships in a way that's distorted, and they're reading anger or they're reading conflict into exchanges that don't have those. The other issue that I think really exacerbates and can cause relational aggression is just our culture. I mean, we very much live in a culture where competition, where winning, comparison, those are all part of our way of being. Competition and winning is really valued, and I think it can be healthy too. It's not necessarily on its own a bad thing, but what it means is that kids then learn that they are in competition with each other, that they view each other in terms of, well, is she thinner than me? Is she prettier than me? Is he better at sports than me? And power. We very much value power over cooperation. As I mentioned, relational aggression really peaks as kids start to move into middle school, and that's a time where friendships, peer relationships are everything. So social status becomes really important, and what the research has found, and there was actually a study done out of UC Davis just this year that wanted to figure out who was doing the bullying, who was doing relational aggression, relational bullying, as well as other forms of bullying. And what the researchers found is it's the group of kids, and they looked at middle school and high schools. The kids that were not at the top tier of popularity and not at the bottom tier of popularity. The kids that were like in the second or third tier, those are the kids that used bullying most because they were doing it to try to climb up that social ladder. And so social status does become a way that, it is a way that bullying is a way that kids may try to achieve social status by knocking others down. And then gender differences. So again, anecdotally, we think, oh, girls are so much meaner than boys. And again, I think that relational aggression can be more intense for girls, but it doesn't mean that your boys may not also be experiencing it. We know that boys in this society, just in general, this is just in general, are socialized to be strong and tough and to win. And that may mean that boys that don't fit into those categories, that are maybe a little more sensitive or just different in some way, may be more likely to be targeted. Boys in this society are not necessarily praised and reinforced for talking about their feelings or expressing vulnerability. And so that means that relational aggression can be used as a way to act out those feelings because they're not expressed directly. As I mentioned, boys, and I have RA in some of the slides, it's just relational aggression. So boys may not be as emotionally impacted by relational aggression. Again, that's just sort of a generalization, doesn't mean that there won't be examples where boys are very impacted by it. And as I mentioned, it may not be as intense for boys. They're actually one of the strongest protectors for children against any form of bullying, is to have strong friendships. And then girls, so as I mentioned, girls are really, in general, much more relationally focused than boys. So, and girls are also more intimate with their friends. So whereas boys may be more inclined to go and do activities with each other, girls are going to be more inclined to talk. So you may see girls on the playground in their groups talking, and you may see boys playing. Girls, I think even more than boys in this culture, really lack the conflict resolution skills and the assertiveness skills really required to navigate problems in relationships. And so what happens with girls is, because they're not comfortable saying directly, I am angry at you, that made me feel really sad, or you hurt my feelings, they'll go under the radar and act out in these relationally aggressive ways through excluding, or maybe cyberbullying, or trying to sabotage the other friendships of the girl who they're mad at. So rather than just saying directly, look, I'm mad at you, and let's work this out. Girls, I think even more than boys in the society, are socialized to be nice, to smile, and even when they're mad. So we know what we call women and girls who are strong and assertive. We know the kinds of language that gets used to criticize those behaviors in women and girls. So that's part of the socialization process, and it can really feed into relational aggression. Mm-hmm. Right, so boys move on much more quickly, and that physical bullying is actually, not that it's not really painful and emotionally hurtful, it is, but it can be easier to get over, and it ends. And boys don't ruminate as much, so ruminating, the constant running it over and over in your head and just not able to let go. Girls are much more have much more difficulty with that. And I think women too. I mean, which is that it's subtle. I mean, it's subtle for us as outsiders, as parents, as teachers, as the adults involved in these kids' lives, kind of on the periphery. It's really hard to pick up on this stuff. And it's true, the physical bullying is much easier to spot. It's much easier to discipline or punish or identify. This stuff is so subtle. And that's why I think the more you know about it and the more you know what's going on in kids' brains and between them, and can recognize some of the signs, which I'll be talking about, the better, because this is a very under the radar form of bullying. So what you as parents can do is try to give your kids the skills and strengths that they need so that they're, if relational aggression comes up, they know how to deal with it, they know how to communicate with someone about it, they know how to deflect it, they know what to do, and that you are reinforcing that in the home. So you're providing them with the safe place they need in the home. And then you're right, the schools need to do their part. And I'll be talking about actually some tips for schools as well. So girls, it's often a girl who, relational aggression I'm talking about, not the other forms of bullying. Relational aggression with girls often happens because there's a threat. So it happens because a girl there's maybe some jealousy, maybe a girl is becoming popular with the boys or is getting some kind of positive attention from whoever, from peers, usually peers, but it could be academics, it could be sports, and that the queen bee girl is threatened by that and acts out in this underground way. But it also happens because there are conflicts between friends, between girls. So the last slide was the best frenemies. And that conflict then, because the girls don't have the skills to be able to directly resolve it, the relational aggression happens, it goes under the radar. But I'll be talking a little bit more about that because there are certain characteristics of girls who use relational aggression and those who are targeted. So I'll get to that, and hopefully that will answer your question. If not, we can return to it. So just very quickly, so some age differences. As I mentioned, for kids who are younger, so elementary school kids who are maybe using relational aggression, it's not as sophisticated maybe as the kids who are using the alliance building and the sabotaging. It's typically more overt, still more under the radar than the physical bullying. It's often you can't play with us, so it's that exclusion. And then middle school through high school, it becomes much more underground, more covert. And I do want to note that in high school, so the upper grades of high school, so like 11th, 12th grade, we actually see a dip in all forms of bullying. So it seems to peak in middle school, and then as kids are starting to have more of like a future focus, the bullying kind of will subside. In general, again, in general. So where are we seeing relational aggression? And who here has heard about the Ophelia Project? So they're a wonderful organization, and what they do is relational aggression. They do trainings, and they put out materials, and they study relational aggression. I think they started just looking at girls, but then realized, boys are being impacted by this as well. And so they have a great website, which is in your resources. So what they found is that in elementary school, the relational aggression is happening more often in the cafeteria and at recess. So not happening so much like in the bathrooms, and in the classroom, not as much. Middle school and high school, it's happening in the hallways. So cafeteria, recess, bathroom, not as much. And I mention this because when we talk about schools, it's important that schools know where the hot spots are for relational aggression, and that they increase the monitoring that's happening there. So in middle school, it needs to be in the hallways, and in elementary school, it needs to be more at lunchtime and at recess, so on the playground. Who here is, do you guys participate as parents in being like playground aides and that kind of thing? You doing that? So some of you are. So this is good, again, for you to know, but also for school staff to know as well. And then the other place that it happens is in cyberspace. And this is where we also see a gender difference. So, and there are all kinds of statistics, and they're kind of all over the map, but typically it's about 30% up to 65% I've seen. So 38% of girls online report being bullied, and they're bullying each other. So the girls are bullying usually other girls, and then 28% of boys online report being bullied. So you see a little bit of a difference. And again, this is reflective of girls not feeling comfortable with that direct communication, and this is a way that they can say all those mean, nasty things and not get caught and still be nice, like still be, a good girl. There was, Adina's Deck is a Stanford project, and they researched 3 California middle schools, and they actually found the number of kids in general who had experienced cyberbullying was nearly 60%, so it's pretty high. So let's talk about common traits of kids who use relational aggression. First of all, these are typically kids who feel that what they're doing, there's nothing really wrong with. They often will feel that it's justified. Well, she made me mad, so I can treat her like that. She's a whatever. They have a tendency, I mentioned the amygdala, they have a tendency to interpret events in a paranoid manner. So they really very much, it's in the world of psychology, it's called hostile attribution bias. And it means that they, just really, it's a lot of big words, to just say that they see hostility where it's not there. And so what that means then is they're more inclined to act out that anger that they think they're seeing, to act out against it by using relational aggression. These are also particularly girls now. The girls who are using relational aggression have quite a bit of anxiety about maintaining their relationships. So these are girls that like exclusive relationships. So they like their best friend to only be their best friend. And if that friend has other friends, that's threatening to them. And that's when they're going to act out against those other friends to try to knock them out of the way. Mm-hmm.
What underlies that? Why someone needs to have, I have 2 questions, but
Yeah.
that's one. What would underlie a girl needing to have that level of control over her one friendship?
So a couple things, which I'll which is on the slide as well. Family dynamics, so it is often, there is a correlation between these kinds of girls, and I've just seen research on girls, so it may be true of boys too, but again, this is that emotional intimacy, intensity that we see more often with girls. These are girls whose family environment has a lot of conflict in it, and they may have a parent who pulls the girl into a more exclusive relationship, and the parent tries to align the daughter against the other parent. These are girls who often play peacemaker between parents, so they then are raised with the belief that they have some control in relationships. So as the peacemaker in their family, they see, oh, I can make peace between my parents. That means I can have control in my relationships, and control is good. They're also they get used to that exclusivity. They like the feeling of being their parents' ally, and so they act that out then in their other relationships. The other thing that happens is these are girls with deep insecurity. So while they may look confident on the outside, I have a picture, and I can't remember the name of this character, but from Mean Girls. Who here saw Mean Girls? Rachel, okay. So they may look confident on the outside, and they may be one of the popular girls, but really inside they're deeply afraid of losing that intimacy and connection. And they're not skilled enough to be able to get that feeling of belonging and connection in other ways in their life, which is part of what our intervention needs to be with these kids, is helping them to find ways to feel acceptance and connection and belonging, which we'll talk about.
Can I just